Welcome to Restrocast. Today, my guest is Dan Mesches. He's the CEO of Sprinkles. Dan has done almost everything that a restaurateur believes they need to do in life, right from working in other restaurant groups to building his own, exiting to a private equity, and then getting back on saddle to help scale, run other brands. A lot of insights on not only how to scale brands, but the power of compassion and care for not only what you do, but also for the people you work with. A lot more on this podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to Restrocast. Thank you for doing this. Really excited to know your journey, and we'll dive straight in.
Perfect.
I've been a restaurateur, and I was an accidental one. I thought restaurant is the easiest business on earth. I never saw restaurant owners at their restaurants. I saw somebody else managing, somebody else cooking, somebody else coming and eating. I thought this must be the coolest business on earth, and I fell in only to discover the other side of it. My belief is that nobody in the right state of mind enters restaurant industry, or rather, definitely not by choice. 23 years plus for you. What's the story? Where it all started?
You nailed it. We have similar beginnings probably on this, and you're right. Listen, you look at it and you go, this is simple, but the truth is, simple is hard, right? Few variables that blow up into a million variables. So it's tough for me. I went to college and grad school for a totally different field. Always worked my way through in the business. In fact, I grew up in the Hudson Valley in New York, a little bit north of Manhattan by the Culinary Institute. And my parents would always tell me, you love food, you should do this. Probably the reason why I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But when it was all said and done and I was...
like rebellion.
Absolute rebellion, when it was all said and done, I loved it. And then I looked back and it was hard for me to put together the pieces. I just thought, I like it, I'm passionate, I want to do something I'm passionate for. But if I really look back, I was like, this was my path. My grandparents on both sides are immigrants. One side on Russia, one side on Italy, and not a lot of money, and food really meant something, right? It not only was about nourishment, but it was status, it was everything. And so when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with my Italian grandmother, who would take me out in the fields and say, let's pick this and let's pick that. And do we have to? Let's just go to the grocery store like everybody else. And what I didn't realize at the time, that was really a base for my future. And when she would say things to me like the tomatoes don't taste like they used to, or this lamb doesn't have flavor, as a kid, I'd be, what are you talking about? And obviously we found that with massive farming, there is that issue. And so through all that, that really imprinted on me and really changed what I was going to do for my career, obviously, and also led me on my path.
Interesting. So you went to the culinary school, or
I did not. I went to undergraduate school for political science and grad school for international relations, but always just, whether it was working in a restaurant, a bar, a cook, a bouncer, whatever, short order, those were all the things that I did. And I realized, wow, this makes me happy. And it's hard. I mean, we all have friends, and some of them are passionate about what they do, and you can have great conversations with them, and some of them aren't. And man, I'd hate to go through life not being passionate about what I do.
Absolutely. I'm going to double click on that, later in the conversation, but where it all started, like what was the first job at the restaurant post? I mean, I'm not talking about the part-time pieces, but then, what was the real first restaurant experience?
Sure. The real experience, besides all the part-time jobs from when I was in high school leading up to it, I was back in New York rewriting my thesis, and I talked to some guys that had a new restaurant. I said, look, I need a job while I'm doing this. And they said, the only job we have is a cocktail waitress. I said, well, I can do that. I can sling cocktails. And 2 weeks later, I was GM of their new location.
Wow.
So that was my start. I realized, and I learned a lot working for an independent, and you really learned about cash on an everyday basis and the pressure behind that. But for me, I knew if I really wanted to make this my career, I had to move on from there to a large company and understand the corporate side of things. So a couple of years after doing that, I was recruited to move to Washington, D.C. For Marriott. It was in a restaurant group. No one knew it was a restaurant group of Marriott. It was polished casual and a lot of different concepts. So I was very fortunate.
But that was when you were not really, from hotel management or from a formal education background.
Correct.
Like to get into the Marriott. What was it out? Well,
So I was recruited by someone who is now my mentor, and I've been fortunate. I've had great mentors in my career. So I was recruited to be an assistant manager in the restaurants and come there. My first day, I remember, my first day of training was peeling shrimp for 14 hours, and I loved it. Right? And from there, that's where I learned the structure, and not just the restaurant business, but the business of restaurants. I was fortunate. I got to, through a series of buyouts, I got to work with a bunch of different companies without having to go to another company. And at a young age, I had a lot of responsibility, probably more than I should have been given at the time, and had about half the country and for this group, and realized that although I really enjoyed it and it was great, and it was
that was the Star Restaurants Group.
No, that was before that. This was a company that got bought out a few times. It was Gilbert Robinson in the beginning, which created Hula Hands. I wasn't on that side. It was Specialty Concepts, and then just grew from there. And then we had a management buyout, and we led the company called Creative Restaurant Management. But what I realized on that is I was learning a lot, but I really needed to go someplace else to learn more. So I was fortunate. There was one company that I wanted to really work for in the U.S., and that was Lettuce Entertainment, based out of Chicago. And they were starting to open on the East Coast, and I was fortunate I got hired for that to help open up the East Coast. Moved to Manhattan. My wife and I, we didn't have our kids at the time, and had a great experience working in Manhattan. In my string of buyout stories, that division got bought out, and I became VP of a group in Manhattan and had about 30 or 40 restaurants in my group. Loved that, but really wanted to, instead of just saying I was an entrepreneur, really wanted to be one. So did move back to DC not that long after, started my own company, Star Restaurant Group. And we were very fortunate there. We had a great team, but we had from Esquire Best New Restaurant to another one was Condé Nast, one of the best new in the world, to Gourmet Magazine when that existed, Hot New Concept, and on and on. But it was a great energy with great creative people. And through that, we had everything from food trucks to bakeries to high-end dining to catering. And we had a series of restaurants around the DC area. The last one that I did was called Potenza after my grandmother, Italian with a bakery and fresh made pasta and wine store. So it was fantastic. And through that, I also, we had a consulting company that just came by accident, really. And we were fortunate enough to be able to consult at a executive or board level with companies like Ritz-Carlton, Outback, Harley-Davidson, Delaware North. So it turned into something because we weren't the ivory tower guys. We were the operating people. And so we were doing restaurant concepts or RFPs or beverage programs or training programs.
And were you running that company, or was it like?
Yes, I had. So we had the restaurant side and the consulting side, which was I was CEO of both, and then we just had a great team of people that could go back and forth between those. I sold the restaurant side in 2010 and kept the consulting, and continued then to work with private equity on emerging brands, which was just a phenomenal experience. Moved from Washington, D.C. to Austin for one of those emerging brands called Hopdoddy. Brought that, I came aboard when the third had just opened, brought in private equity a year later, grew it to 4 states, took the opportunity to cash out, and then moved on to Sprinkles, where a 17-year-old brand now, but we treat it like it's brand new brand, emerging brand, has a great history. The founders did a phenomenal job, but we've been able to kind of turn it on its head and how we get things to our guests. So that's the long and short of the story there.
That's phenomenal, and thank you for making it sound like a cakewalk. Like that was absolutely smooth. But I'm gonna pull you back to the to the first one. I see this the common thing in how you stated having great mentors, as well as how the first break into the restaurant space in 2 weeks you were a GM tells me that you have been high ownership, always. You talked about that you always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and you later started your own company. But I think being the GM of a restaurant or being on the management side in the restaurant is probably the craziest thing one can do to themselves, unless that's what they love, that's their poison. So my question to you is, how much do you relate to this aspect of just being high ownership all along in life? Is that the right categorization of?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I do to this day. I mean, what I love most is being in the field, where you feel that, right? Where you feel that ownership. It's so easy to get insulated in the office, and nothing against what goes on in the office, right? We need all that. But the truth of the matter is, the field can keep on going without the office, right? But we can't keep on going without them.
Yeah.
And people forget that sometimes, the old tail wagging the dog. So we don't want, of course, we never want that to happen. But honestly, that's where all the fun is, right? I mean, you feel the energy, right? The pulse. It's a frenetic business. It's one of those things. It's hard because you always feel busy no matter what.
Yep.
Whether you accomplish things are a whole another thing in a day. But that high energy that you get out of those emotional connections with your team, with your guests, those are everything. Those make, listen, to me, it's on a higher level. Those make life really rich and rewarding, and they're just they make up for all the difficult parts of the business. But anyone that's in business or whatever they happen to do, if you're passionate about it, right, it's difficult.
My experience as a restaurateur, and I was an accidental one. I told you, I was telling you about, right? I jumped into it like an investor. I thought that this is going to be the easiest thing, and somebody else is going to do the turnkey project for us, and we're just gonna masquerade around as the owners of this restaurant, and it'll be cool, right? But my experience, the restaurant floor was absolutely crazy. And I personally, I am a high ownership guy. Like if I'm somewhere, it doesn't matter whether I own that place or not. I'll own the situation. I'll try to fix stuff. And I remember in the restaurant, when I tried to do something, actually I was the bottleneck. There was a time when the staff basically requested me to get, can you please take yourself outside the kitchen and please just don't come in the way. And that was the day I realized that, there is something beyond ownership, and that is this organized chaos. How do you navigate that? And then the other piece was when I dealt with end consumer, and the psyche, the psychology of end consumer, how picky they can be and how ruthless at times they can be, only because they want to have a certain experience which you promised, from your brand side. I could never understand which part I loved or which part I hated. But I'm going to put that to you. What was your poison?
You know what? I like you. It's a tough balance, right? Like, I love being in the dining room, talking to those guests that came in, and whether it was a star athlete, a movie star, the president, or the person down the street, right? There was that same energy behind making sure that when they came in, they felt like they were at home. And they were spending their money, right? They wanted to have a good time, and maybe they had a bad day that day and already came in a bad mood, or maybe it was a special celebration, and you had to make it so they would go, I'm telling my friends and we're coming back tomorrow. That's a great challenge. And honestly, sometimes, right, you probably experienced this too. One of the tough things is when someone has a problem, right? But one of the great things is going to that person that has a problem and then winning them over for life. That to me is the biggest opportunity that you can have in the business. And through all that, right, you have a team that's doing this, right? It's not you. You know, early on it feels like it's you, right, in this. And then you realize, kind of like what your staff told you, oh, I'm in the way. I'm screwing this up. And that's a really hard lesson. Certainly took me a while on that one. And one of my mentors, I asked him a question one time, and very successful. And I said, how did you do this, right? You've created these companies. You've been a founder. You've been CEO of a big company. How do you run that when it's kind of your baby? And his answer back was, look, I'm always going to think I'm the best at things. That's my ego. But I've hired great people. I've got to give them an opportunity. And that really clicked with me, right? The opportunity. Don't get in their way. Help mentor them, but don't get in their way.
No, absolutely. And I think you know, on the guests, you know, when you talked about winning them over for life, one thing that I found crazy from my own experience was, and that was a revelation for me. I remember this was my restaurant back in India, and in North Indian, you know, you have lentil, that's called dal. You know, that's a staple. Most of the Indian people will have it every day for a meal. And I remember one day this customer, you know, came and he's angry, he's super angry. And I, by chance, I entered the restaurant right at that time. I walked up to him and I said, you know, cool down. What's wrong? He said, well, your dish, your dal doesn't taste, you know, as good. I was like, oh, and we had changed the chef, you know, 2 days, just before that, and I tasted it, and this was a better one, and I tried to convince him. I said, you know, sir, this is actually better dal than the previous one. And this guy shouted back at me, and he said, you know what? I don't come to your restaurant to have a better dal. I come to your restaurant to have the same dal. Yeah. And that was a shock, because that day I got another insight, and I was like, oh man, that's true. Customers are not coming to you. You know, you cannot make their experience of food better without their permission. They come to you because they imagine your food. They exactly know what to expect, and you have to deliver exactly what you delivered last week or last year or last month or last day, a day before. You cannot improve it. You cannot degrade it. Nothing more, nothing less. What about the consistency? What's been your experiences with something like this?
Yeah, very similar. Listen, consistency is everything, right? You're right, and people are going to remember how they think they had it, well, no matter what. But the hardest part is our products change, right? And so how do you make that consistent when maybe the tomatoes aren't quite as ripe, or the meat is a little more sinewy, or whatever happens? And that's where you really have to work with your team and train that team to have the right to, within the framework, make sure that we're still hitting on that. It's incredibly difficult to do that. But I think this whole story on this starts with training, starts with giving people a reason to work in that environment, being proud to work in that environment. Because, we talked about this should be simple, right? Hot food hot, cold food cold, friendly, in a clean environment. That sounds like that's really simple. Well, remember, you're starting with that every day. It's new every day. Not a lot of businesses start brand new every day. And that means the variables that could make it go one way or another they're almost uncountable in a day. They're infinite. So what makes that work? It's the culture that you create. Right? It's making the folks that are there proud of it. And even if, as sometimes often happens in the restaurant business, that job is a stopping point along the way for people in something else, still, how can you make them be in a place where they go, I'll do whatever it takes. I really care.
But if I jump to the current, present day, and last more than a couple of years actually, people in the restaurant space, mostly it's a pit stop, it's a side hustle, and not only in the front of the house, but even in the back of the house as well. Plus, loyalties, are I would not really say that they're not there anymore, but I think way less than, probably a couple decades before. How do you maintain that? I know that, that's why food is pre-prepared. That's why frozen food. That's why a lot of central kitchen and whatnot. But what's happening with that side, to maintain the culture?
Yeah, and listen, you're absolutely right, and it's really difficult. But to me, and we talked about this some, but it's about the emotional connection to the folks, right? A true, honest emotional connection that people can feel and know that you not only believe in what you're doing, but you believe in them. It's not a magic formula. It's about encouraging people to be their best. It doesn't always work perfectly. We're human beings, right? But that pride level is everything. And sure, making sure that there's a phenomenal training on that, making sure that the recipes are 100% correct, making sure that the facility is in great shape, because a lot of times in restaurants we ask people to do things in facilities that are not up to snuff, right? And that kills morale in a heartbeat. So it's so many pieces of it. But the great news, at least for me, is it's common sense. Listen, I'm not the smartest guy around, but I have common sense, right? At least I think I do most of the time. And common sense gets you to that, what is the base? What do we do? At Sprinkles and in our restaurant concept picnic, we have something called 4 legs of the stool, right? And we said, how do we get people from despair past to see things the same way? Not really easy. So we use the model of a stool, because you pull out one leg and that stool is going to fall. So we have emotional connection to the team and guests. We have phenomenal product, and we have sparkling, clean, and well-maintained environment, right? So we have those 4 legs. And if you have those, everybody's going to have a different idea. I mean, maybe my 10 is your 8 or whatever it is, but at least we're talking the same language. And I think that's so key with folks. And
how do you percolate that emotional connect to the last mile, like to the bottom?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of important things. And in that, there's all those management terms like skip level management and all that kind of thing. But those things really work, right? You have to be out there. You have to talk to people. And it's not just talking to your VP or your regional or your GM. It's talking to the line cook or the dishwasher, the folks making the food, right? Really the most important people out there. And by the way, if you haven't had a dishwasher walk out on you on a Friday night, then you don't know how important they really are, right? Every time that would happen to me, I just had bought a new pair of shoes, But it's putting your heart. One of my mentors said to me, you know what? You got to put your heart on the table. And that's really what it's about. And it's being sincere in that. So these are not rocket scientist lessons, but they're hard. They're really hard. The amount of emotional energy it takes. You probably, with your GM, you would see, a GM goes home emotionally tired, but almost more physically tired, right? Just with that frenetic pace we're talking about. I think as you go on in your career, and it's not about your physical actions as much as it's about your mental actions and how you talk to people and what you do and what you portray, you should be going home mentally exhausted instead of physically exhausted. I think people forget that sometimes.
No, I think you're true. But I still believe that the last mile, like percolation of that energy, to the bottommost, it's difficult. Mm-hmm. But if a brand can actually do that, that's that just changes. Because at the end of the day, I was talking to someone and they asked me that, given we are in the restaurant tech space, so people keep on asking us different questions. And one day this gentleman asked me that, what's the best loyalty program, that can be, that I can subscribe to for my restaurants? And I was like, your staff. He's like, no, I mean the app. I was like, no. The problem is that, your customer loyalty is tied down to your staff treating them right. And all the loyalty points they're going to earn on it, on the transactions is actually the side thing. So, and that's actually, because when I look back, I keep going back to the same restaurants, where bartender, server, or even like right at the entrance, if I'm greeted well, I know this is like, I have a feeling of belonging. and that gets me going. Most of the times, 8 out of 10 times. 2 times I can experiment something else. So percolation of that energy to the bottom is magic.
Absolutely. I mean, and it comes in so many ways. And it's interesting you talked about loyalty programs, and I agree. It's with your staff, and it's listening to them. Listen, we have 401k that we contribute, and great health plans, and vacation and sick pay, and you name it, right? And we should. That's our responsibility. But guess what? Some of the favorite things are. It's their cupcake card at Sprinkles that they get for free cupcakes every day. For a 22-year-old, right? Forget about the 401k and the health plan and all that kind of thing. It's that. And we also have something called daily pay, right? So they can get their money on a daily basis, or a large percentage of it. And until I really looked at it from their eyes, I didn't see that. I thought, well, what? But no, let's talk about the health plan and the dental and all that kind of thing. And we still do, but let's really walk in their shoes to figure that out.
What is one thing that just like a disproportionate insight you got? One of this, can you double click on that cupcake card thing?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think what I always forget sometimes is, right, because I'm just me walking into a place, right? I'm just the guy that comes in and says hi and stuff. You sometimes forget in your career what that means for people to do that, right? Because hopefully we don't have a swollen head and we're not just thinking we're the greatest thing walking in the door. But I think all of us sometimes forget about that energy and what that really means. And on the other side of the coin, how if you do it and you don't do it right, you're on the phone the whole time, you're not connected, you're not present, how much that can hurt things. And that's been big to me. Big from a family perspective too, right? Those kind of things about being present. And if you can be present with your team when you're out there, the connections are 30-fold what I could have imagined they would be.
How often are you on the ground? Like, you're visiting and talking to people on the ground at the stores?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it depends. With the pandemic, our bakeries were open, and so we made sure that, because we wanted to keep everyone safe, but I made sure I was traveling constantly, right? Because if people have to be out there working, we better be out in the field with that. And it's my most fun thing to do. So I'm on the road a lot. I'm, the 100 night a year or whatever person on the road or more. And this year it's only been about 10 nights so far, but we're early. We're the beginning of March. So often is the answer. Try not to let the the business of restaurants get in the way of restaurant business and being there. But honestly,
so what is it like? Like you have a schedule, or they know, or is it like a surprise visit? And what do you do when you're there? Like,
Sure.
I just want to give me a view in a day.
Yeah, I don't do surprise visits. I want these to be positive visits, right? And we have a team of people that are checking to make sure things are right and all that. I'm there for face contact and time. So I was in.
You're not the auditor or the surprise check or the police.
No, listen, I'll see things and we'll talk about those things, and I'll talk to the people when I'm on the ground about those things, because I don't want it to come back to them, right? I want you to hear it from me, but I want them to know. I want it to be a positive experience. I was just in LA, and so one day I spent the day driving around with our area director for LA and getting real time with her and talking things through, and then visiting those bakeries and talking to the folks there. And then the next day I went to bakeries on my own and just pop in, say hi, shake hands. Always eat cupcakes, always taste cupcakes. Tough part of the job, tough part on maybe on the diet, but hey, that's what we sell besides hospitality. So make sure people see that we're doing that, because that's one of the other tough parts about our business. We sell millions and millions and millions of cupcakes a year. Every one of them has to be good enough to be in a white tablecloth restaurant, right? Well, standards are high at white tablecloth restaurants, and we believe that our product does that. So it's and we put a lot into that.
So how do you keep a tab on how, let's say, a store is performing, and by that what I mean is one, I think the top line sales, I call it the poor leading indicator, especially in the restaurant's case, because you don't know when you're going down because your sales may still, be going before they take a dip. Customer feedback, it's happening all around. What's your way of listening to the customer feedback? And once you do that, what's your way of responding to that customer?
Sure. So we're very active in our engagement with our guests. And let's take first on a complaint side of that. So when we get that, whether it's an email or whether it's calling our guest services or it's on social media, that goes out. That doesn't get hidden, right? That goes out, and all of our senior team is on that. Whether it's what some people might think is small or something large, we make sure. And the amount of time we spend on that between operations and marketing and myself and training is huge. So it probably, any complaint can end up being 10 total hours. People are 20 or 30 because...
So you're actively listening to social media?
Actively listening to social media.
Like what kind of turnaround time are you looking at? Like somebody tweets something wrong?
We try and do everything immediately. Our team is on call in the evening for that, and we're looking at things at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. I give everybody a little bit of break after 10 o'clock. Maybe we answer the next morning, but our team is so great at that they'll often answer.
But would you like to talk about like what's the structure like? Probably for a restaurateur, how does that management of listening, especially social media, it's wild. What all channels can you?
Sure. So we do it through a few different ways on that. So the old way was mostly through our guest services, and we have people on the phones 16 hours a day, I think, right? Because since we're in different time zones, so there's that, and there's that voice to listen to. Obviously, there's email that guest services is monitoring also. Then social media, and whether that's TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, that's constantly being monitored. And people are always on call for monitoring that. And on call doesn't mean that your phone's a little ways away and you check it every 5 hours. It means you're on it.
Yeah.
We still want people to have a life, right? So we rotate that and we give them an opportunity. And then there's the feedback that comes in directly to the bakery. And that all percolates to a central Excel sheet. Now we deal with these individually, like I said, on a minute-by-minute basis. Fortunately, we're not swamped with them. But our guests really know our product, and they're passionate, and they're going to let us know if it's not quite what they think, and we appreciate that. So then we do a weekly Excel spreadsheet on that, so we can look at our patterns and see what's happened. And does someone say something's dry? Our product's best fresh baked daily, and we start again every day. So guess what? It was cold there, and the heat just turned on, and now we've got to be a little bit more careful in our baking. So we look at it to that.
But what's the response? Is it the free cupcakes? Is it a refund? Is it something else? Somebody gets on a call each time? What's happening?
Yeah. So it certainly depends. If people complain about a product, we're going to look at that very closely, and we're happy to refund that and give them a chance to come back. I mean, the whole thing is to win them back, right? So we have that, and sometimes they just want someone to listen to through this, and that if we're great active listeners and we're sincere, that handles anything most of the time.
But who's vested with this power? And I'm asking this question because that really becomes a problem at times, that whether this power is vested centrally, whether it's at the store, is it the manager, is it?
It's across the board.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an hourly employee and someone comes in and has an issue, we expect you to take care of that person. We give you the license to take care of that person. If you're uncomfortable with that, then we can bring it to someone else. But no, we feel good about our culture, and we feel good about giving people at all levels that responsibility. We want to make sure we view it so we know what's going on, so we can see long-term trends, and whether it's about a new product or a flavor, we want that feedback. We also have a system, we use Zenput on a daily basis.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so
Shout out to Vladik and team.
exactly.
Although they sold to Crunch
They
Time,
did, yeah.
and Vladik has walked home very
Yes.
happy.
Yes.
But you're great.
Yeah,
Go on.
and they've been one of our great partners in this. And so we're really able to, whether it's from our wine check that we do twice a day and we take pictures or comments, we have a flow of information that backs all of this up also.
Brilliant. I think that's great. Thank you for bringing that up. If you guys using Zenput tells me that anyway you're pretty tech and data oriented. What I also saw that with Sprinkles you're looking at different form factors of business as well. You would love to know what kind of bakeries or dispensing is happening apart from having stores.
Yeah, great question. I mean, what we've really done is take our model where most times there's not a lot of there hadn't been a lot of pre-orders, and now we want to make it very frictionless and make it easy for folks. So we've done some different things, some of which the founders did and maybe languished for a little while, and some of which we started from fresh with the start of COVID. But for us now, we have remodeled all our bakeries. I think we have 2 left, where we make it much easier to walk in, much easier to pick up your pre-order, whether you did that through our app or whether you did it on our Shopify site, or
Is it like an order ahead?
Order ahead, correct.
Yeah.
So in the old days, when you ordered ahead, we really defeated the whole purpose of that because you still had to go ask someone for your order, or you had to wait in line behind people. Now we have custom shelving built in so that people can come pick it up. We also made pre-orders a little more difficult before. Now, if you want your picture on a cupcake, well, we don't have to resize anything. You just use your phone and take a picture of that. And now, and we still have a human being if you want to order from a human being, but we have we work with Byte, they're another great partner, Brandon and team, and we now have integrated those into our counter in our remodels. And we have 97% adoption rate for people to go in and use that. The human's there to help you, but it's just frictionless for people. And then we have our ATMs. And our ATMs actually are having their 11th anniversary last week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been big. And we have 2 different types. We have those on our brick and mortar that are...
These are like shop in shops? Somebody else's store or?
No, these are they're both. The first model is our own, attached to our brick and mortar. They take up 80 square feet and we have great sales and they're Instagrammable moments. The other that you'll see is we work with a third party on logistics and actually sell to them wholesale called Propango. And those are the ones that you'll see at airports, college campuses, and non-traditional retail. Propango. They've been another fantastic partner that we've had. And here in the airport in Las Vegas, you'll see we have 3 machines there. So we have over 50 of those across the U.S. and probably we'll have 80 to 100 by the end of this year. So another way to get it to guests, we hope one day to make it that you could also pick up your cupcakes remotely at an ATM nowhere near a bakery. So your pre-order would be there waiting.
I'm just wondering, so if you're doing these ATMs dispensing cupcakes, when somebody orders on DoorDash, is the DoorDasher going to the nearest ATM, getting the cupcakes out and then delivering?
Not yet, but that would be the great thing. What we try to do, by the way, to make it easier for 3PD is, in our bakeries that we have room, we try and make a separate pickup area for them. So they're not behind the guest that doesn't quite know where they're going and they're in a hurry and we don't want to slow down their day. So that's worked pretty well so far.
Yeah, that's one big problem everybody is dealing with, almost everywhere. Were you really able to solve it at every store? Or?
Yeah, we feel pretty good about it. I mean, listen, our bakeries aren't that big, so it's not perfect, and we're learning through these remodels. But overall, we feel like it's worked quite well. We get great comment for guests, and it's allowed us to figure out for our new bakeries that we're building our next opening is coming up in Irvine, California at the Spectrum Center, what we need to do. And they're simple things. When the founders first made the concept, the idea was to have one door and have a line, right? Because lines are popular. Now people are not big fans of lines. They're big fans of, again, like frictionless. So let's make sure when we develop a place, there's always at least 2 doors for people to get in and out. Let's make sure there's that room for that shelving so people can pick up and make their day easy. Those cupcakes are fun, right? They're supposed to make you happy. Let's make sure that the pickup of those doesn't put you off in a bad mood.
I was talking to, one thing that I need to tell you about Sprinkles is that I was talking to this bakery chain in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh. And, when I was talking to them and they said, hey, we are the first cupcake chain in Saudi Arabia. I said, all right, and who do you think is like, somebody who you are like? And they said, oh, have you been to Sprinkles? You think of us as Sprinkles of Saudi Arabia. I was like, oh, wow, that's a big one. That's
wow. I thank you for telling me that. That's great. Listen, we have a huge brand halo. It's much beyond what our footprint is, even though our footprint is across the United States. We're just 24 locations plus the 50 ATMs at this point. Now, we will be much more soon. We do have an LOI, signed LOI for Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're talking in Canada right now. We're talking across the globe right now. Our first domestic franchise was opened in December, right outside of Salt Lake City.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, and many more to come this year. By the end of this year, we'll probably have signed up for 50 to 100 new bakeries. So that's very exciting for us.
You keep on, you're continuously mentioning founders at Sprinkle, and you partnered with them 3 years.
Yeah, I came aboard
back?
6 years ago. Our private equity company, Carp Riley, came aboard in 2012.
Why did you partner with them? Let's talk a little bit about what did the founders do and why are you here?
Yeah, so the founders got involved with private equity before I came aboard, so that was in place. I came though because one, I only want to do things like, as we talked about earlier, that we're passionate about, right? And a brand that I can believe is best in brand, and that's what Sprinkles is. So, and by the way, I was consulting on a project in 2007, and I was out there, and I was out in LA, and a friend of mine said, you got to go see this place. They always have a line. And that happened to be Sprinkles. So it was
wow.
It was part of me, and I didn't know it. And then Carp Riley invested in the company 2012, and they're a fantastic PE firm and some folks that are very entrepreneurial, and I always wanted to work with, so the stars all aligned. And was able
private equity is private equity. I don't know what private equity is entrepreneurial means, honestly, because I feel that there is a mandate of that money. There are money managers who need to deliver something, and while, I don't really paint them in like a black and white of being ruthless or being kind. Mm-hmm. I believe that money has a mandate, and their job is to, put founders on the path to make sense out of that money. Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
Listen, I don't disagree with you on the mission at the end of the day. We're all here to make money too, right? But I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great private equity companies, large ones like Catterton is fantastic, or smaller, more boutique like Carp Riley. They doesn't have some of the same mandates as far as when a fund ends or whatever it happens to be. So that can allow them to be a little bit more entrepreneurial. To be fair, there have been large ones that are entrepreneurial, but the smaller you are, I think the easier that is. So, and the fact that they've decided to hold the brand for this long tells you about their belief in it.
So when you say entrepreneurial, you mean what? Are they more risk takers, or are they more flexible?
I think a combination thereof. Certainly more flexible. I think risk comes easier in that when it's your money on that. So I do think it's a combination. But for me, at the end of the day, all of this is, am I in an environment where I can work with great people and create a great brand, or take a great brand and bring it to the next level. And you know, Sprinkles certainly was a great brand. It's funny because right at one point, cupcakes were the hottest thing out there. They're not, right? They haven't been for a while. That's a great thing for us because it's an opportunity to bring people back. And we've seen positive comps, sales, same store sales for years now. And who doesn't want a good cupcake, right? Who doesn't want something that makes you happy? And by the way, that's allowed us to also expand our brand to cookies, to cakes, to we rolled out mini chocolates and large chocolates last year. We rolled out baking mix last year. We had cupcake mix before that. It allowed us to build a D2C channel, which we launched during COVID, but fortunately had all the work done pre-COVID. Just by luck on that. So, and build a CPG line. So that's where some of that entrepreneurial is.
So where are the what part of the business now, or what's the focus of founders at Sprinkles, and what's your focus as a partner in their growth?
Yeah. So our founders, Charles and Candace Nelson, sit on the board and do not have day-to-day involvement. Are always there. If we need them, always there for a question, but they've gone on to other things.
Got it.
Yeah.
You worked at somebody else's restaurants, then you started your own, sold that, then you worked with private equity, taking some of these brands, bigger. As an entrepreneur, we see that so many times, and this is a question, personally keeps me awake and keeps bugging me as well, that entrepreneurs make their products, they build the companies, they create that soul, but then there are times when they're not able to really take it big, and then somebody comes in from outside, sees that product differently, and unlocks the scale, and boom, the same thing which was still small becomes probably 10x, 20x, 100x. What's been your learning? And if you're talking to a restaurateur, a passionate founder who's still trying to figure out where's that unlock, what have you learned about that unlock?
I'll tell you what, here's some of the best advice I'd ever been given by a business partner of mine. And he said, love your business, but don't fall in love with your business. And I think that's one of the biggest founder problems, right? It is their child. And then because of that, sometimes you make maybe irrational decisions. And that to me is one of the biggest lessons I can give to those folks.
But then when you're making that decision, how do you know which one is irrational and which one is rational?
Yeah, listen, how do you know in life when something's rational and irrational, right? In your private life or whatever it happens to be. You're not always right on that. But I think if you can really dissect the decision and say, am I doing this for ego? Is this really right for long-term growth? Is this because I want to be right? Is this because I have an unrealistic view of what can happen? All those things that can happen with falling in love with something. That's what you've got to take it down to. Not easy, right? So, but it's really a soul-searching thing to do. And the other part of that is, right, knowing yourself well enough to know when it's time to bring in those other folks that can do that. There's very few people, right, in life that we found that can take a brand from founder to CEO of a billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar company or whatever it is. There's a few famous ones we can think of out there, but pretty few and far between.
But what's that, in your experience, right? For example, at Sprinkles today, or I don't know if you want to take an example or anecdote from your previous, ones. What was that one thing that you could see because you were dispassionately looking at the problem, you were disconnected with that loving or falling in love with the brand, but loving the brand versus, probably somebody who grew up with the brand could not really see? Like, what was that? Can you share some unlock moments where, something either was deprecated or something was added and like changed the face of the brand or the fate of the brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it comes in a few different buckets on that. And one very important point is growth, right? And real estate selection. And I think the problem that a lot of founders make on real estate selection is they're in love with the brand, and they believe everyone's going to be in love with that brand. And so you might take a offbeat location, say that's okay, the brand can handle it, right? And there's been, I think, more businesses have probably been killed by, that third location that everybody thinks is going to be great, that then tubes the company, because we're not, because either you're not being smart about it, or you're looking at it with that passion and intensity that being in love with the brand comes with, that you have to look at a little bit. I think the other part of it is not wanting to change, right? Because we do have to change with time.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we don't make the product just as great. It doesn't mean any of that thing, but nothing stands still, especially now. And I think that's been a mistake. I've certainly made it as a founder with things where, no, this is exactly the way it has to be, and we're not changing that. And a lot of times that's fine, but if you don't truly look at it, if you don't truly examine it, you're doing yourself and your investors a disservice.
Absolutely, I think that's true. I think, and change is difficult, especially when you're right, by not changing. It's really not that simple to say, hey, now is the right time to change. But on that, I think COVID, last couple of years, challenged notions of change, or whether the change is good or bad, quite far and wide. And from our vantage point, at Restoworks, we look at 55 plus countries, on the ground, and I can tell you that COVID brought change almost everywhere on the earth. It doesn't matter what geography you were in, what market you were in. Businesses change, brands change. They change how they serve, especially dine-in restaurants. And so many restaurants who used to say, hey, once food leaves this door, this is not our food anymore.
Yeah.
Those are the ones who brought the most change. What's your view on how it is changing right now? Because the way I look at it, I still feel it's all transient. What's your view?
I think it is. The change, as you said, has accelerated. I think there's some opposing forces, right? Because as the world goes back, quote unquote, to normal, right? There's people that also want things to be the way they were before.
Yeah.
And so there's that dynamic.
I want paper menus.
Right.
I want physical menus, though I'm the tech company, but
you're absolutely right, and when you see people fumbling with their phone or whatever it is, it can be frustrating for you as a restaurateur. So there's that, and where do we take a step back when it's smart, even though it's going to cost us X more dollars a year to do that, and how long are we going to fight against that? But at the same time, how are we going to also keep our minds open? For instance, I was talking to our team this morning about, with the difficult in labor shortage, this was in our restaurant concept picnic, do we at the patios that we're having trouble getting enough people to work, do we make those QR code out there and more full service inside? And do we really look at those scenarios? Because you know what, it's not working the other way. So how is this going to continue to grow? And how can we keep the human element, and by that, back to the emotional connection in this? And how can we make decisions that aren't just short-term business related? I mean, during COVID, we were able to make a lot of short-term business decisions. We knew people were going to be more flexible in that because of the state of the world. Now we've got to look more long-term, and people are struggling with that now. We can't raise prices as much as before, no matter what is going on with inflation or the price of eggs. I mean, so what else can we do that's smart? The easy stuff has taken on that. I think we're still juggling with that, and we're juggling where tech fits in.
What are the brands in the market, not necessarily, of course, competition, but let's say in general in food service, you admire, because they are adapting to change quite well? Or do you look at them and you say, these guys are beasts, like they...
Yeah, listen, I think there's examples large and small, right? It's interesting, you look at Chipotle, right? And I think that they had done a good job putting themselves in the right place before this, right? With the changes that were made in the company. But it's just amazing when you look at it now at a difficult economy, how, because they stuck to their roots and quality of product, people don't feel bad at a higher income about trading down to that. They don't see it as going down. They just see, right, they're spending maybe the same amount of money, but in a different kind of environment. And I think they've done a phenomenal job with that, and and have guided their way through the landmines on that quite well. And then I think there's a lot of little entrepreneurs, small out there, that I love looking at. Right, what is their next thing? What are they taking? What are they doing with the current product?
Any mention worthy who you feel that has have done a good job at change or?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of companies have done a good job on starting to build platforms, right? This is on a large scale, but it's interesting, right, with McDonald's and their experiment with Krispy Kreme and how that's grown. And we're actually doing something like that right now with a brand called Tip Streets, which is Austin-based, and we're selling our cupcakes in their locations throughout Austin, and we're looking at how we're going to expand that across the country. So I think those things, it's funny, restaurateurs are funny folks, and a lot of times in the past, it was, well, I'm not gonna help other restaurant folks. They're going to take people away from me. I think that one of the greatest changes now, and you see this with small companies in particular, is we're banding together. And I don't just mean with the Restaurant Association, things we've done before, and all those are great things to do. But really, how are we going to help each other's business? And that's quite a shift from what it used to be 10 years ago.
You see much more collaboration and open to ideas.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought up collabs, because we do those all the time, and they're what makes business fun. Whether it's with Lexus that we had a great collab with, not a restaurant company, on December to Remember, or Bobby Brown that we've got coming up on a cupcake or a chocolate promo, to a bunch more I can't release right
Have you thought of putting your products on other restaurants' dessert menus?
Yeah, we have, and actually we're talking to some companies about that right now. Cupcakes, it's a little bit difficult. Bake fresh daily,
Correct.
right? But as I said, we do have a chocolate line. We do have some other things, and we have our red velvet brownies that are fantastic. And we have a new product that we did for Lexus called Red Velvet Truffles, and so we'll be rolling those out later this year too.
Interesting. Dan, you're visiting Mertech. That's a multi-unit restaurant technology conference. What's the motivation there, and how are you guys looking at tech at Sprinkles and Picnic both? Yeah. What's your view on that?
Sure. I mean, crucial, right? We have totally changed our tech stack in the last few years. We talked a little bit about some of our partners that we worked with on that. And there's many more in there, whether it's Wisely or Narrator or Clavio, and all of those kind of things that we can do to take advantage of the rich amount of data that's coming to us. Not invasive data, but just data that we can do better, and we can bring across. All of our different platforms were separate. So we didn't know who was using the ATM. We didn't really know who was using the website. We didn't know who was walking in and coming online, or just walking clientele. Now we have a bridge across that. Now we're trying to learn, though, how we can serve those folks better. So that's an important reason to be here. We, as a company, it was born with ideas like personalization before people did it, and like the ATM, and those kind of got stagnant for a while. We went in and rebuilt all that, and our Daniel LePage, our VP of IT, has done just a phenomenal job at that. And so that's why I'm here. I'm speaking also. I don't know what I can add to all those brilliant tech folks out there, but I want to also be able to walk the hall and learn a little bit more. We're really, right now to us, we're at our infancy with AI, and whether that's on menu suggestions or whether that's in how we want to take in our guest service phone answering tree. That for us is really our next step as we work together with all these other partners.
Great, and I'm actually looking forward to catch up with you on the floor, to discuss more on especially your international plans. I think that's exciting. Singapore, Korea, that's going to stay with me. what will be your advice to a budding restaurateur or people in the food service industry, especially on the management side who are building brands? How are you look? And I'm asking for that advice from both perspectives. One, few lessons from, you know, your years of work in this, and two, when you're looking at life, you know, forward from here, how the industry's moving, shifting, what probably the future of restaurants is not going to be similar to, you know, how the past was. Probably the cycles are shifting, you know, all the teams are not going to be as tenured. Probably processes and systems are going to, you know, take over, you know, the human side. Do you see this dissonance? And if not, if yes, what will be the lessons on both sides? If not, what will be the three lessons that you would want to share?
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
You know, listen, on the first one, my lesson to folks that are early in this business is, you know, be here if you have a passion to be here. If you're not, find something else. Use it for your stepping stone, but find something else. You kind of talked about it earlier, but if you don't love this business, you're going to hate this business. And who wants to spend life doing that, right? And it should be something that we're happy to do, as difficult as it is. So to me, that's what I would say to folks. As far as how things are going to change and what this business is going to be, yes, it's going to continue to change. There will be more automation for sure in what we do. Believe me, we'd love to be able to figure out how to frost a cupcake better through automation. But I don't think they can ever do, I don't think at this point with our style, we're at a point where you know, they can do better than our phenomenal teams are doing right now. But there are the other things, and the things we're talking about that will make it easier for folks. And I think the other part of it is, how can we make it a better environment for the people that work for and with us, you know? And whether that's the dishwasher, the baker, the froster, the associate up front, the managers, what can we do so that their job is easier? It's a hard life, right? Hospitality is hard, and it's hard emotionally with dealing with folks that, you know, have a certain expectation that you want to deliver, and it's hard physically. So what can we do to make their life better? Not to eliminate people, which a lot of people think of as tech is to eliminate people. No, how can we take those same folks, keep them, make their job easier? And I do think that's going to be key as we see, whether it's a push for a 4-day work week, which is difficult in a 7-day-a-week business, or whatever it happens to be. So let's make sure we're all not the dinosaurs that sit there and go, well, I had to walk 30 miles to school in 10 feet of snow. Let's figure out how we can continue doing better for our teams.
Absolutely. And my last question will be, especially because you talked about passion, what about work-life balance?
Yeah. Work-life balance is always a tough one. And my advice on that one is something that I can say because I didn't do a good job. I haven't done a good job on it, I think.
Could you have?
I could have done better. So for me, and this is whether it's with, you know, a partner or kids or your family or your dog, whatever it happens to be. Listen, for me, I always tried to be there at those special moments, the soccer game, the school play, whatever it was. But what I didn't do well was be present, right? And if you're going to take the time to do it, be present. Don't be underneath the bleachers with your cell phone or whatever it happens to be. Don't be at a anniversary dinner, you know, in the hallway on your phone. Yeah, exactly. Texting, whatever it happens to be. That's hard. But I do think that you become a better manager and a better person if you can do those things. Because the people around you feel that. And frankly, it gives license to the people you work with to do that too, and make sure they have that life. Listen, we ask a lot of people. Let's make sure we can do our best to give them a good life outside of work.
Dan, that was brilliant. My last question will be, what's your favorite cupcake?
Well, you know.
Had to please her.
Yeah, Lisa. I mean, it's like asking who my favorite child is. So I got to be careful. Hannah, Sophie, there is no favorite. But I do have to say, I love our triple cinnamon. That's great. And we just changed the recipe on that. So our cinnamon there isn't powdered, it's a liquid, so it's even more moist. But we do phenomenal LTOs. And Charles Craig, our VP of Culinary, Justin Murakami, our VP of Ops, and Michelle Wong, our CMO, we love going over this stuff together. But we've done some great ones like Flaming Hot Cheeto, which phenomenal cupcake. Right now we have got a really good one, kind of a birthday cupcake for Fat Fit Fun. That's phenomenal. And we've got a great matcha one coming up. So I love the old favorites. Can't go wrong with a red velvet anytime, but always look out for those LTOs that we're doing.
That is super. You've given me a list of cupcakes to go around. Dan, pleasure. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Loved it.
There's so much to learn. One observation that I had in this conversation was that I think you've done so much so well that that in your own characterization of some of those things as, oh, you need to do, you actually told about, you talked about so many things in a very matter-of-fact way, as if they were like the easiest things to do. So all I can say is, this is inspiring for me to do my job so well that it starts looking as easy as you made it sound like.
Well, that's very nice of you to say, and thank you. Thanks for allowing me to share all that. It feels good.
Thank you.
Thank you.